All right, so let's take a look at maybe the signals for a bull run. And part of this will be breaking down a little bit about what Cathie Wood is doing in the markets and what she's saying, because a lot of this may be going toward ETFs, the direction of a lot of these protocols, all that stuff we'll break down for you today. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. A couple of things here. Kobayashi letter, key events this week you guys need to be watching. We will be breaking these down for you, but July CPI inflation coming in on Thursday. We got jobless coming in, PPI inflation on Friday, also the consumer sentiment data. And then the total of 3 Fed members will also speak. So interesting stuff. 15% of the S&P 500 companies also reporting earnings. This is another busy week. So we'll cover all that stuff for you. I want to get into a few points here. And of course, everybody's asking me, and I'm sure you guys, I had another big event this weekend. We were talking about training and explaining what's happening in blockchain in general, especially around Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is the big question, is why are we seeing such lackluster movement on Bitcoin? And I think some of this is going to be really ahead of what we're seeing in terms of inflation. Remember, inflation had a good dip over the past report. If we see that again, could be good signs here of a potential soft landing. I know a lot of people are still questioning whether or not that could happen, but good indicators right now. Question mark. Love to see and hear if you guys think we're going to see a CPI downshift. Just drop some comments down below. I want to also get into a couple other things here. This, of course, is Cathie Wood hitting on a couple of scenarios. Just in, SEC required to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to ARK's application for Bitcoin. This is by August 13th, so we're going to know here just in a few days. We actually have a little tracker for you guys to track this down. But I'm kind of curious, do you think she's going to get it done before anybody else? There also are some interesting moves around the Bitcoin ETF filings. We'll talk about that in a second. It gets pretty interesting as we go forward. Here's Raoul Pal's thoughts on BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF filing. Let me play this for you guys because I think it's a good one. Listen in.
What's your thoughts around the Bitcoin ETF situation? Does this XRP really make it more likely we're going to get those Bitcoin ETFs? And maybe was it just inevitable once BlackRock entered the game, they were always going to get a Bitcoin ETF?
So my personal opinion, and look, I know nothing, is that Gary Gensler was under a lot of fire politically because saying no, 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 no to everything. And he had said that Bitcoin was not a security. So therefore, it becomes really difficult not to allow or to appease the politicians by saying, look, I've passed the bloody Bitcoin ETF. At least I've done something. You know, I'm comfortable with Bitcoin. So my guess is he gave the nod to BlackRock and said, listen, I need to do something. We're going to do this. And they've obviously have an open conversation with the SEC. The SEC had given the guidance as we will accept this if you do this. So they all did it.
What's your thoughts around the Bitcoin ETF?
All right, so
situation?
You can kind of see
XRP
a little bit there with kind of the directive of Raoul Pal of kind of the fixes in on an ETF. And I think, yes, and we've had the guys from Bloomberg on here on the show talking about what the future of ETFs are in general. And I still do believe we are in a position right now that is going to be one of the major shoes to drop in the market. And that will have some big effects on crypto, especially on Bitcoin if an ETF goes through. So, however, it may not necessarily be the entire scenario. Another thing that I want you guys to think about is the long-term effect of how all of this adoption could happen. If you look at this chart right here, crypto users versus internet users over the same time, one thing here, you'll notice here, 2024, about midway through 2024 is when we really accelerate because that is when we will see the first billion users in crypto. If that occurs, Metcalfe's law, the network effect starts to kick in and we see a massive uptick. And this, you'll notice kind of the separation there of how fast it took to get to a million or a billion users on the internet and what that might look like over the next 10 years. Definitely high acceleration. So interesting stuff. Just to get a quick catch up on Cathie Wood's ETF. This, of course, is how many days are left right now as a recording of this? 5 days, 4 hours, 25 minutes. So coming very quickly to a screen near you, whether or not she's going to get an ETF. I want to jump over to this first clip because this is going to get into a couple of things that really will play into whether or not Cathie thinks Bitcoin will have a major role in this next bull run. I know it will, but listen in.
After the excitement about BlackRock's ETF filing for Bitcoin, in June, which rocketed Bitcoin beyond 30,000. It has come down a bit. Even more notable is the volatility has come down dramatically. In fact, we haven't seen this low of volatility since 2020, right before it embarked upon a major move. Now, sometimes volatility means that it's going to break down. So when there's very low volatility, you look for signs of, is this going to break out or is it going to break down? Given our on-chain analytics, we're on the bullish side. We're probably, if there's going to be a break either way, it will be a breakout to the upside. And it's very volatile, of course, as we all know. But higher highs and higher lows means we're in a secular bull market.
All right, so we'll break a little bit down for you guys. This came from one of the most recent reports, the Bitcoin Monthly Report. They get into their bullish and bearish positions across this full report. I would suggest take a look at it. It's a pretty good report. But this gets into the Bitcoin fluctuating and support and resistance price that she's talking about, the lack of volatility or the fact that we haven't seen that kind of activity since 2020. This also, I think, will be this secular breakout, which is to the upside, but going to take a little bit longer to be able to play this out overall. Now, the one thing that may change that, of course, is an ETF. If an ETF comes in, a Bitcoin spot ETF, if it does come in and we do get an approval, most likely we're going to see some pretty big moves. Now, the other aspect to that is regulatory. We'll get into some regulatory topics as well, but there's a lot happening right now that is good for this market. Now, maybe you're brand new to crypto. Maybe this is the first time that you guys have been to our channel. What I would do is ask you guys to subscribe. All you have to do is click that little subscribe bell. And here's another thing. If you will click and just hit notify, and if you'll grab that little bell right there, the notifications will come when we do live streams. We do a lot of Q&A, all that good stuff. Check out a lot of our playlists if you guys are not doing or checking out some of these playlists. We've got several. This regulation hearing playlist is one you should check out. It's going to catch you up on everything. So we always do that. We always love to thank our sponsors around this time, and that is Chart Prime. If you guys want to elevate your trading game, one of the things you can do is use one of the tools we use in terms of technical analysis, and that is Chart Prime. Make sure and just use our link down below for a discount. All right, so she mentioned secular markets and kind of this effort here that we're going to be facing with Bitcoin. This kind of breaks it down a little bit to give you some definition. Secular market driven by forces that cause the price of investments or an asset class to rise or fall over a long period of time. So it's going to take some time here. I would agree with her is that there's a lot in play right now. Obviously, we know what the regulatory environment is doing. We know that that's going to take some time. And also, we're starting to see a lot more adoption. Now, this is the question mark I have. If we see the adoption coming in, if you look back at the chart we just showed here in terms of the adoption to that 1 billion users, then you have all these companies that are moving into the space, whether it's PayPal or others that we just did a video on. There's a lot of good opportunity here. I want to get into this next clip, and one of the things around the next clip that we'll break into is really kind of the idea of digital property rights. And digital property rights, as you know, when you think about crypto in general, very, very important. Listen to what Cathie Wood had to say on this.
We do believe that the three revolutions around crypto that we set forth in our Big Ideas 2022, and you can find that on our website, that they are underway and they will not be stopped. So far, the Ethereum blockchain upon which DeFi is built has held up very well. Digital property rights, which is what NFTs represent, digital property rights are going to become incredibly important. I know, again, from my economic background, that property rights lift people and countries out of poverty. And we think that the opportunities that the digital property rights will allow creators and many others, we're going to find all kinds of utility, and we can't even think of it right now, just like we couldn't understand quite what DeFi was going to be when tokens first came around.
All right, so she hits on all of the markers of the future of blockchain, and obviously Ethereum, you know, we're a big fan of just Ethereum in general, but it's really more of the use case, because use case is really going to be the differentiator not only in adoption, but also the application of how not only technologies will deploy, but how companies will be able to utilize these technologies to grow their businesses. And at the end of the day, that's where the big growth will occur. So loyalty, I think, is going to be a big part of that. Obviously, gaming, retail will be a big factor. We're going to see a lot more of that. Now, the other aspect of this is the crypto-centric companies that are starting to outperform everybody else. If you take a look at this article right here, these are crypto-centric centered public companies. And if you look at a few here, I want to just highlight a couple. Here's MicroStrategy right here, turned profitable again in second quarter, thanks to surge in Bitcoin price. You can kind of see the move right here, but not only by Bitcoin, but also by MicroStrategy, trading under MSTR. Another one right here you're going to recognize, and this is, of course, Jack Dorsey's company Block. Another one that's been doing well, post 34% year-on-year increase in its Bitcoin revenue. Then you further go into Coinbase. Obviously, we saw Coinbase, and I think Coinbase is still highly undervalued because of its situation right now with the SEC that I think eventually is going to get cleared up very quickly. And then further in there, you got CoinShares. This is European digital asset manager. CoinShares saw its revenue surge by 33% this year. So again, everybody seems to be doing just fine, not to mention Robinhood, who has also become the first time, I think, profitable since going public. So this is another good sign in the direction of where a lot of these companies that are, operating in the crypto space that are starting to outperform the traditional S&P 500. So another good sign there. I think this only shows that we are on the cusp of the next major move. Now, will it take some time? The cool thing is that, and this is something we talked about for almost a year and a half now, is that it just needs to work through these down trends. Now, yes, there's some macro that still is pressuring us a little bit, but the likelihood is we're going to start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Here was a good example, growth of Bitcoin and other top assets over the last decade. You can kind of see 2016, there's Bitcoin, 17. Let me kind of highlight down on that. Point is that Bitcoin has been one of the most resilient assets out there, much less if you look at some of the other innovators like Tesla, which again is another stock that Cathie Wood likes, and you'll notice there, right there, also expanding. But if you'd been investing in any of that at the level that you were investing in other stocks in something like a Bitcoin, then obviously you guys know where that's going. I want to get into an array of clips here because the first one is going to get into kind of this deadline and whether or not it's going to happen and some other things around this. Listen to this first clip.
Cathie, so you are in this race. Let's talk about the race a little bit. The first important deadline coming up is August 13th, where the ARK filing, the SEC is either going to delay it, which we think they'll probably delay it, and then BlackRock is later. You filed before BlackRock, but BlackRock came in with the surveillance sharing agreement with Coinbase. That was novel, right? Now we're looking in the future, there's talk of a common clock where the SEC could approve a bunch of ETFs at once, putting you on a level playing field with BlackRock and others. What's your take on how this will play out, given you filed earlier?
I think you're probably right that August 13th will come and go, and I think the SEC, if it's going to approve a Bitcoin ETF, will approve more than one at once. So then, again, because most of these essentially will be the same, and it will come down to marketing, communicating the message.
All right, so I think she's still very optimistic on an approval. Obviously, we understand and have talked to many people who know and understand the ETF cycle that this is getting higher and higher in terms of a percentage to actually happening. So love to get your feedback. Do you think that will move the price of Bitcoin in an upward movement? Will this be the thing that truly begins the bull run? Is that what we're waiting on, or do you think it's going to be more on the regulatory front? Love to get your feedback on what you guys think. Here's another clip on Cathie talking about Coinbase in general, because I still think Coinbase is going to be a major player within this next bull run. Listen in.
And do you think the surveillance agreements with Coinbase are going to be enough to deal with things like price manipulation in this market? I mean, that's been one of the main concerns from the SEC lawyers with whom we've spoken.
Well, what I find so interesting still, and this is why we believe that the SEC will lose the grayscale case, how can you approve a Bitcoin futures ETF and not a Bitcoin ETF? And in fact, if you're really thinking about consumer protection, a futures ETF is swap space. So there's counterparty risk there that you would not have with a Bitcoin ETF, which is backed 1-to-1 with Bitcoin in Coinbase's cold storage. It still confounds me.
Not to mention the point that Eric makes, which is that if there had been an ETF, a lot of people wouldn't have bought Bitcoin at FTX.
Interesting. Well, again, these are good signs. But again, it all boils down to Gary Gensler and the SEC. That is going to be the big factor here. Another thing that plays into it is what's happening over at Grayscale, because Grayscale still one of, whether you love it or hate it, it's going to be a position. And Cathie has some things to say about that. Listen into what she had to say about Grayscale Trust.
The SEC does give its blessing for a spot Bitcoin ETF. Would you plan to sell out of GBTC and buy one of these physically backed funds?
I cannot talk about what we would and would not do. And in fact, our compliance team is, giving us marching orders not to talk very much about this filing and its aftermath at all.
Now, what she means there, she's going to sell every bit of GBTC. That's going to be the only result, and that would make sense if you look at kind of where the future of these ETFs will fly. I think this is getting pretty heated in terms of an opportunity and heated in the way that it may impact the market. Now, another thing that plays into this is an Ethereum ETF. Remember, we had the Ethereum ETF futures filings, a mass of them last week. Listen into this clip and what she thinks about that.
There's also been sort of a race that's unfolding for an Ether futures ETF. There's been a ton of filings to that effect, and not specific to those funds, but do you sense that the mood music around the SEC and what their appetite to allow these products to launch has changed in the last several months?
Well, I think that the two other branches of government, the judicial branch and the legislative branch, are giving the SEC pause because the SEC is losing cases in court having to do with its regulations around crypto. That's the first thing. And there are bills that are making their way through the House and are seeing some bipartisan support. So I do believe that Gary Gensler, I guess last week or 10 days ago, said something like, well, I'm not the only one who makes this decision. There are 5 commissioners. Now, of course, we know they're weighted towards the Democrats, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. And so one assumes that the way that Gary votes is the way the FCC will vote. But he seemed to be distancing himself a little bit, and so maybe we can take that as a bit of a clue.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the fact that Gensler mentioned that does kind of give a little bit of inkling that he's starting to maybe pull the pressure off, understands the bipartisan position. Cathie mentioned that. We've covered that extensively here. There's a lot of movement. I think there's one more thing that is playing into this now, and that is with the new release of PayPal stablecoin this week. That starts to change the dynamic of the banking infrastructure, the financial services infrastructure. If you get a lot more of that, that's not, don't count out BlackRock and all of the other filings, but now you get into things like JP Morgan Chase, et cetera, that could potentially go into the direction of stablecoins. That is a big part of it. And if you look at what James Seifert says here, interesting, Valkyrie just made a big, and this is kind of interesting, just made a potentially massive move here. Not certain if and how it works, but they filed what they call a 497 to change the investment strategy of their Bitcoin futures ETF to include Ethereum futures. This would start October 3rd. So again, this would start to change things up, could be early signs of some very interesting reasoning here of why these companies are going in and making some modifications to these filings. So I just think all of this is a good sign. I think it's all pulling into one scenario, and that is we are nearing the end of a down economic trend. We are pushing now into a monetary shift potentially in the US around crypto and blockchain, and we're starting to play catch up on the regulatory fronts around with things like MiCA and et cetera. All of this is pointing in the right direction. You've got, I think it's a good time in crypto. Maybe this is brand new for you. Maybe you first started to get into Ethereum and Bitcoin. Everybody's going to ask, what's the best? I can't pick the one that you should be in. What I can tell you is if you're looking at blockchain for the first time, you're doing something right. And that to me is really the advancement of this technology and what's happening around our monetary system, especially around, I think, what's going to happen with Ethereum and obviously with digital assets as a whole. You guys know we're big fans of that. So if you guys want to watch a little bit more on that, we have a ton of playlists down below. If you're not part of our Diamond Circle, make sure and jump in. It's very easy to get involved. You just click the link down below, join. It's free. We do another big podcast over there that we don't do here on the show. And I do additional TA. We do all sorts of cool things on research. All that's in the Diamond Circle. So check out there. If you want to catch me, it's out there on Twitter @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.